Hey there. Ever been on vacation, looked at a currency exchange board, and just thought, what is going on here? Well, today, we're going to unravel that exact mystery. We're going to figure out why a dollar in your pocket has a totally different value the second you cross a border.
Yeah, this is the big question, right? Why isn't a dollar just a dollar? Or a euro just a euro? Why does the cash in your wallet suddenly transform in value? It seems super complicated, I know, but the basic idea behind it all is actually surprisingly simple. All right, to make this all make sense, let's follow a story. Let's meet Bob. He's from the US and he's about to head out on a big trip. So Bob starts his adventure with a crisp $100 bill. At home, he knows exactly what that's worth. But his first stop is Germany. He gets to the exchange counter, and poof, his $100 becomes just 90 euros. Okay, so it's a little less, no big deal. But his next stop? That's where things get kind of wild. He lands in Vietnam, and that same $100 makes him an instant millionaire. He's now holding 2.5 million Vietnamese dong. So what gives? How can this same money be worth so many different amounts? The short answer, it's basically a global popularity contest. Seriously. The value of any currency today is all about the classic economic rule of supply and demand. The more people, companies, and governments around the world want to get their hands on a specific currency, the more valuable it becomes. Simple as that.
But, it wasn't always this way. For a long time, before the 1970s, we had what was called the gold standard. A dollar was worth a very specific physical amount of gold, and that kept everything pretty locked in. But that system was just too rigid for our modern, fast-moving world, so we switched to what's called fiat money, which really just means money that's valuable because we all believe it is. Its value comes from our collective trust in the government that prints it. And that trust, that's what drives the supply and demand we were just talking about.
So what is it that makes a currency popular or desirable? Well, we can break it down into two big buckets. First, let's look at the forces working inside a country's own borders.
The first, and maybe the biggest, internal factor is inflation. You can think of inflation as a slow leak in your money's value. If a dollar buys you less stuff today than it did yesterday, it's losing power. And really, it just makes sense. Nobody wants to hold on to a currency that's constantly getting weaker. And if you want to see an extreme example of what happens when that leak turns into a flood, just look at the Zimbabwean dollar. Back in the 80s, it was a strong currency. It was actually worth more than a US dollar. But fast forward to the 2000s, after some serious economic trouble, its value just completely cratered. Demand for it pretty much vanished.
Now, countries aren't helpless here. Their central banks have a huge tool to make their currency more attractive: interest rates. See, by offering higher interest rates, a country creates this kind of magnetic pull for foreign money. It's like they're saying, hey, investors, bring your money here, park it in our banks, and we'll give you a better return than the other guys. That, of course, boosts demand for their currency.
But just offering high interest rates isn't quite enough. Global investors, well, they're not daredevils. They want to put their money somewhere safe and sound. So they're always looking for countries with a stable government, with laws that don't change overnight, and a well-managed economy that isn't drowning in debt. A country that checks all those boxes becomes a much safer bet, and that helps keep its currency strong.
Okay, so that covers what's happening inside a country. But that's only half the story. A country's relationship with the rest of the world plays a massive role too. This is where we get into the global money game.
Think about it this way. When a country sells a lot of stuff to other countries, exporting, it creates a natural demand for its currency. So let's say Japan is selling tons of cars all over the world. If you're in America and want to buy one of those cars, the dealership eventually has to pay the manufacturer in Japanese yen. The more cars Japan sells, the more yen the world needs, and boom, the value of the yen goes up.
Now, if you want a huge, real-world example of this, look no further than something called the petrodollar system. Back in the day, the US made a deal with the big oil-producing nations to sell their oil only in US dollars. And since basically every country on Earth needs oil, this created this constant, massive global demand for US dollars, which really helped lock in its spot as the world's go-to currency.
Some smaller countries have this clever little hack to keep their currency stable. It's called pegging. They literally tie or peg their currency's value to a stronger, more stable one. Take Brunei. It pegs its dollar 1-to-1 with the Singapore dollar, so it basically gets to borrow Singapore's economic stability. The catch, of course, is that if the Singapore dollar takes a dive, the Brunei dollar goes right down with it. Other countries do this too, like Belize, which pegs its dollar to the US dollar.
So we've seen all the things that can make a currency strong and popular. But this whole conversation brings up a couple of really big questions. Like, is the goal always to have the strongest currency on the block? And why don't we just make things simple?
I mean, it sounds amazing in theory, doesn't it? One single world dollar would make everything so much easier. But the euro actually shows us why this can be so risky. When a bunch of countries all share one currency, they also have to share one monetary policy. So back in 2009, when Greece had its massive financial crisis, its problems started to threaten the economies of much healthier countries like Germany. It's like having a roommate who runs up a huge credit card bill, but it hurts your credit score. One country's economic mess becomes everybody's problem.
And here's the final twist. Stronger isn't always better. It totally depends on what a country's economic strategy is. A country like Singapore, which has to import a lot of its goods, loves having a strong currency. It makes everything they buy from other countries cheaper for their citizens. But then you have an exporting powerhouse like China. They might actually prefer a slightly weaker currency because it makes all the stuff they manufacture cheaper and more attractive for the rest of the world to buy.
So, you see, the value of money is so much more than just a number on a screen. It's like a live updating report card for a country's economy, its stability, and how much the rest of the world trusts its future. So the next time you open your wallet, just think about the incredible global story that every single bill and coin in there represents. What does it tell you about the world?